Thank you, Blake. Yes, so my name is Shana Cook. I'm the Director of Educator Development with the World Leadership School. And part of the work that we do with World Leadership School is we implement these virtual coaching programs in schools all across North America. And in talking to our teachers who we've been coaching with this year, we keep hearing from them that asynchronous learning is not really the problem. Like, teachers have been doing asynchronous learning for a really long time. The problem right now is, how do we use synchronous learning in such a way that we can maintain this sense of community and culture that we've been nurturing all year long? What are some tools that we can use to do that? And how do we really hit on those SEL components of teaching that sometimes fall to the wayside when we get to see our kids every day? And so probably more than ever, it's really important to focus on how do we maintain that connection. And, you know, we have Nathan here who is lower school, Jim who's upper school, and I'm going to be taking the middle school component of this because that learning is going to look different depending on where your students are in their own learning journeys. So if you had a chance to look at the agenda, basically the way that it's going to run today is we're going to start with a conversation starter. And really, these are great. And if you look in the resources on the bottom of that link, there's a whole document that we put together of questions that you can pose to your students in the beginning of a synchronous learning session. We think it's really important for you to take some time for this. A lot of times we can move through these things in 2 or 3 minutes when we're with our kids in person, but you're going to see, if you've been doing webinars like this, and once you start hosting your own online sessions, you're going to see that everything takes a little bit longer. You ask a question and there's this like super long awkward pause, and we need to really just get comfortable with that awkward pause, because we're not in the space where we can recognize normal things. Like, if a student wants to answer, maybe they'll shift in their seat, or they'll take a break, or they'll look around to see who's going to talk, but we can't really see that right now. And so everything is just taking a little bit longer. So we really recommend at the beginning of each synchronous session to take some time, and maybe that's even 15 minutes, to really settle in with your students, ask a question that is easy for them to answer, but one that kind of touches on a little bit of thinking, a little bit of feeling, so that you can continue to dive a little deeper into who they are and let them know that this community that you've built is still really important. So because we have about 100 people coming today, we figured that would be very hard to develop community in that way. So for our conversation starter, we are going to go into breakout rooms. If you haven't had an opportunity to do breakout rooms yet with your students, if you have the Zoom platform that's a professional Zoom, you can go into your settings and turn your breakout rooms on, and then you can send students out into breakout rooms. So the things that we're going to do today are exemplifying things that you can do with students in your classroom. So we're going to zoom out to breakout rooms, and the question that we're going to look at is around permission slips. What are you giving yourself permission to think, to feel, or to do right now in this moment? And so when you get to the breakout room, maybe whoever's the first person in the breakout room can kind of lead that session and conversation, but just have everybody have an opportunity to answer that question. What's one thing you're giving yourself permission to think, to feel, or to do right now? And we'll have about 10 minutes in those breakout rooms, and then we're going to come back to the main room. Does that sound good? Yep, thumbs up. Thank you. If you have any questions along the way, put them in the chat box. Myself, Jim, Nathan, or Blake will be monitoring that depending on who's speaking. Great. I think we're all back. So, so you can see in some rooms, I'm imagine that was probably pretty quiet and a little bit awkward. And some rooms, depending on who's in there, and their introverted or extrovertedness, it was probably a little bit more of an easy flow. But I think it's important to recognize that sense of initial uncomfort that you get when you're put into a space with maybe other people that you don't know or people that you don't know well is uncomfortable, and we just have to make space for that, right? And so as the facilitator, I think it's easy to be, or I think it's important to be maybe a little more animated than you normally would, allow for longer pauses, call people by name if the pause is going and you don't think anybody's jumping in, but just really trying to keep that conversation going without overpowering that conversation, I think. But thank you so much. That was super fun. Well, at least my group was super fun. Okay, so Jim, I'm going to turn it over to you right now. We're going to move into what we believe the 3 key components of synchronous learning are. And again, if you have any questions, please pop them in the chat box and we'll keep up with them as we go.
Great. Thanks, Shana. Well, hello, everybody, larger group. I just had a great conversation with my breakout room number 8. 8 is number great. So that was fantastic. Um, my name is Jim Stevens. I live here in Denver, and I taught the Denver School of Science and Technology for the longest time when that school first opened up. I've got a pretty long independent school background as well, where I taught independent school in Southside, Virginia, right on the North Carolina border before I went to DSST. But really the role that I play now is I'm sort of the traveling coach who's trying to support as many people as I can around the universe to the best of my abilities there. So thanks so much for being here today. Super excited to talk to you during this, obviously really challenging time. And, when we think about, these three kind of key elements to sort of a synchronous sort of experience, Lucinda in actually our breakout group, she talked about, she's giving herself permission not to reinvent, the wheel. She wants to use some of the things that work well. And there are a lot of great practices that we do in our in-person situations that can come alive and can take shape and form in a synchronous space there. But I definitely want to focus on, these three specific elements of sort of the thinking, doing, and especially the feeling in a synchronous environment to build sort of this culture of community, even when we're remotely sort of disconnected from one another. And I want to start off by sort of saying, like, the world has changed, everybody. Like, it literally has. And our world isn't just changing from an in-person sort of learning experience to an online remote one. I mean, all of our lives have been changed. All the lives of all of our students and all of our communities have changed. And they've changed in very big and significant ways. And like, we really need to sort of pause and sort of recognize that as we think about designing new learning experiences for our students, because all of us are in this new world that has sort of emerged, unexpectedly with all of us. And one of the key things here that we try to promote in a synchronous environment, and especially in a time of crisis, like this is a crisis that we're living through here. There is a primacy on the human relationships that we all create with one another, but specifically with our students. And as teachers and educators, we've always sort of been one of the rocks in our students' lives, but now more than ever, we are a rock in their lives. Like, they need more people caring about them than they ever had during this time period. This is, in fact, a pretty sort of traumatic experience for a lot of young people. And the younger you are, probably even the more traumatic this possibly could be. So this relationship piece is really important in creating this synchronous sort of experience here. And there are a lot of things that we used to consider like nice to have or sort of nice to knows, like things like deep, meaningful relationships. Like, those are a necessity now. They're not just, a nice thing to have. Social emotional learning and understanding how that works, that's a need to have now, as well as understanding how trauma kind of works in our communities and how it's sort of shaping and affecting the people that we sort of live with there. When I think about it, when we think about sort of the synchronous environment during a time of crisis, the people that we work with who are actually most prepared to do this are our special education and our educational psychologist folks. Like, these are the folks that have training and are a huge asset to our communities. So these are the folks that are helpful to kind of reach out to who've got sort of this training to help us design synchronous experience too, that are meeting the emotional needs of our students through this process as well. And so as I think about sort of designing a synchronous experience for my student that does take into consideration the social emotional learning part here, really this feeling piece that kind of goes along with the learning. Like, I generate a how might we statement, to sort of define this challenge. And so I'm constantly asking myself, I even put this on my lesson plans and on my curriculum maps here, is like, how might we help our students cope and learn during a time of crisis so that they can continue to grow emotionally, intellectually, and academically? And so one of the things that is really essential to creating a powerful and meaningful synchronous experience is once again, like, just writing those types of things down. Like, really, what are our new goals that we have beyond sort of our learning objectives? What are our social emotional objectives that we sort of have in this process as well? And so this requires a new level of intentionality in sort of what we're doing. And so part of the recommendations that I've been making with a lot of folks in schools and districts that I work with here is just taking a very human-centered approach to designing the synchronous learning experience. And, once again, it's one of those things that we do implicitly, but what we need to do with it now is sort of as explicitly. It's like, I need to make sure I'm placing my student and their learning and social emotional needs right at the center of everything that I'm sort of doing here, which just obviously requires a really, really deep sense of sort of empathy. Because once again, we're doing more than just learning online. Learning is still sort of a big part of what we sort of do, but we have to make sure we're supporting that learning. And anybody who knows with any background in trauma-informed learning that actually there's levels of development. And when there's trauma sort of involved there, like if students aren't feeling safe, they certainly aren't thinking and learning like they normally do. Like there's just brain science behind that. So once again, taking those into considerations. And we're not starting from scratch, like I mentioned before, and that Lucinda mentioned in our group here. Like we do have a lot of great practices that we already do. Like we do amazing planning with our lesson planning and our curriculum mapping. And what I'm sort of suggesting that you do here to sort of be more intentional around the social emotional learning is actually redesigning your lesson planning, whether it's on the back of a napkin, or it's on a piece of notebook paper, or it's in some sort of elaborate sort of format in a digitized document where you're filling sort of squares there. What you want to make sure is that there's three things that you're including on the planning for this synchronous experience that you're doing. Obviously, we continue to sort of think about like, what are our students going to be doing during these synchronous moments? All right, that's not going to go away. That's the same thing we would sort of do in the classroom there. Some of us might even have already included in our lesson planning and for our in-person sort of experiences there, like what are our students thinking while they're actually sort of going through different parts of the learning experience that we share together in the classroom. What I'm trying to ask you to do here is especially intentionally, like put some place on that document where you're doing your thinking and your sort of planning, like how are your students going to be feeling during that first synchronous session where you get together, when they sort of arrive? What are they going to be feeling at the different parts of sort of the learning experience? Are there things that you actually might be teaching and they might be learning about that are going to trigger different emotions that normally would not be triggered? So there really is like this really specific intentionality about thinking, doing, and sort of feeling. Like those things, making sure that we're including them in the learning experience is really, really important. And one of the things that's been really, really helpful to a lot of educators is shifting the perspective of not only just including thinking, doing, and sort of feeling there, but actually taking some of the approaches that other designers use. And when I talk about other designers, I'm talking specifically about experienced designers. And these are people who design like waiting in line at Disney World. These are people who design the experience of going into a Starbucks or shopping in an Apple store, where they are designing experiences when people sort of show up with the doing, thinking, and feeling in mind. So there's already an industry that sort of focuses on sort of this very holistic approach that includes the emotional side of sort of learning that we sort of do there. And so what this sort of provides us with is actually an opportunity in this time of crisis to better our practice, like take our practice actually to the next level with this intentionality around these three things of sort of thinking, doing, and feeling, right? And you'll get an opportunity in a few minutes when, Shayna, Nathan, and I share out our specific sort of sample sort of lesson plans, what that sort of looks like to include thinking, sort of doing, and sort of feeling in the lesson plan there. But it is like one of the things that I really cherish about challenges, and I certainly promote this idea in my problem-based learning classroom that I try to sort of create there, that these problems that we sort of face as human beings, like there are times for possibilities. There are times for opportunities for us to, not only sort of just to think differently during the moment where things are really, really challenging, it is also this time to actually improve sort of our craft. So even when this crisis is over, like we're going to be better, more innovative educators and more responsive to our students' needs as a result of this challenge that's been faced with us in this online environment. Because if you can get good at the online environment, you can imagine that your in-person experience is going to be 10 times better as well. All right. So I'm going to sort of stop there, and I'll kind of return us back there to Shayna to kind of lead us through the next set of activities.
Thank you, Jim. Great thoughts. If you have any questions about anything that Jim was talking about, just drop them in the chat, and then we will get to them in just a second. But Jim, Nathan, and I each created a sample lesson plan for what asynchronous learning experience might look like in the different divisions. And we're just going to take 5 minutes each to walk you through those. Starting with Nathan, I'm going to share my screen so that we can see this. All right, I hope you can see that. Give me a thumbs up if you can at least see my screen.
You can see it saying loading right now. Yep.
Okay, great.
There we
are. Okay. There's our conversation starter. Okay, Nathan, you want to introduce yourself, tell a little bit about you, and then talk about your learning plan for elementary or lower school students.
Great, thank you so much. My name is Nathan Lutz. I am a primary school French teacher. I've been at this, 22 years now. And I also am my school's pre-K through 12 global learning coordinator. I'm at Kent Place School in Summit, New Jersey. And I also do some coaching with World Leadership School, which is a really rewarding experience, and I immensely enjoy it. But I wanted to show you a sample elementary or lower school plan for synchronous learning. Now, some lower schools are choosing to do asynchronous learning, and I've got some resources in our document for you to look at the end, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But I wanted to talk you through the experience of what it might look like doing a lesson online. It may be a little challenging for our youngest of learners, but there's some things that we can do to help make it more manageable. And the most important thing, I think, is engagement. You as the teacher are not going to blather on to the students for 45 minutes without engagement. So there are some tools, whatever platform you use, whether it be Zoom or Google Meet, there are things that you can use. I really love Zoom in that it's got some options for you. So right now at the very bottom of your screen, if you all would just toggle down there and hover over that toolbar at the bottom where it says reactions. And if you click on it, you have two options. You have clicking and you also have the thumbs up. So if you could just give me the thumbs up, just to show me that you're alive and there. You can also do an analog thumbs up like I saw Jim do just now. Other things that you can do are have the students have paper handy and write down something and hold it up and hold it under the screen. It's much easier than having everybody in the class talking at the same time. So I like to always start off my lesson with a sort of anticipatory set, a lesson hook, if you will. And that could be an interesting object, a meme, a quote, a picture, a question of the day, something to just grab your students' attention. I have a colleague who is starting every day off with a joke. And in order to get attendance counted for that day, they have to report what the punchline is to the joke. Whatever works for you all. And then the next thing that I think is so important is to do some sort of a check-in, just check the temperature of the students and to really understand how everyone's doing. Give opportunities offline for them to check in, but give a quick moment for everybody to check in how they're feeling, how they're doing, and to share and to keep that community going. It's also a good time to review your synchronous learning norms, especially with lower school students. And I would even say in your first sessions of synchronous learning to really don't even worry about the lesson, just worry about the nuts and bolts of what you're going to do. Model for your students what it's like. Go through all the different tools that you're going to do. Show them what the expectations are, show them how they should conduct themselves, how they need to ask questions, how they need to participate, etc. Those are all really important things. And if you practice those early on and get them down, then you're able to continue with the rest of the plan. Well, it looks like we're going to be in this for a while, unfortunately, so we might as well get it right. Um, then the next phase is what I call teacher presentation, and that's when you can present or reinforce what your learning targets are for the day, activate some prior learning. This is a good time to solicit questions from the students. It could be done on the paper or in the chat box, which would probably be easier for them. And then this would be an opportunity to conduct some guided activities or model some skills. Of course, make sure that you are collecting formative data on student learning. It is so important that the feedback loop keep going during this exceptional time of teaching that we're in. In fact, it's probably more important now as ever to have that feedback loop going. So make sure that there are processes in place for you to keep that going. And just as we did at the very beginning of this session, there was some small group or pair work. I think that's so important for us to allow voice to maybe our shyer students who are not comfortable sharing in the large group setting like we're in now, especially a class of 100, geez. But if we could break into smaller groups and have people work in more comfortable sized groups, I think that's really great. And you can do some cooperative learning techniques or discussion strategies. Because you as the teacher are not able to be in each of those groups, it's important that we provide scaffolding for them to do whatever that we're asking them to do. So make sure that those materials are available or presented beforehand so that everybody is sure of what the task is. And just as Shayna had instructed us to have the first person be the sort of foreperson or foreman of that group to guide us through those activities, to make sure that it's just not a lot of sitting around going, but that the work is actually going on. And I like the idea of providing choice in all the things that we do, especially in online learning. It's just very important. And it's important also to have some sort of reflection or closure at the end of the activity or the lesson, just as we would in the classroom. And so revisit those learning targets so that learners can self-assess, so that you're getting that formative data on them. Ensure that the student understanding of whatever assignments is taking place, perhaps do an exit ticket or students giving a summary of what the day's learning has been like. And then any follow-up assignments or independent assignments, make sure that they are always at the student's level. I've heard so much in social media about parents having to like walk their child through every aspect. And that's really not the intent of this type of work that we're doing. I want my students to be able to independently do whatever they need to do, perhaps with a little prodding from their parents, but I don't want my students' parents to have to teach them or reteach them what I've done. I want my kids to do that on their own. So make sure that it's something they can do independently. And hey, since they're at home, why not leverage real world or real home contexts where the students can show you something in their home or their yard, or get things from their home to use in those lessons. So that very quickly is my walkthrough of a sample elementary plan for synchronous learning. Shayna, I can't hear
Thank you. I couldn't find my picture, so I couldn't unmute myself. Thank you. Okay, so thank you so much. I am going to move on to the middle school lesson plan this time. And I went a little bit more pragmatic with this one in terms of, and I want to do, sorry. I want to take it off full screen so I can show you some of the toggling. But for myself, for the middle school lesson plan, I was looking at the driving question of, for an 8th grade science, how does our body form proteins? So I'm thinking about, I've got these kids with me for 45 minutes, and how do I want to encourage this synchronous learning through the whole experience? So, hold on one second, I'm sorry. I have lost you. There you are, sorry. Can you still see my screen or no? No.
We can see just the group, the audience. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Let me pull that back up for you. This is where we get confused on technology, right? How about now? Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
We got you.
Okay.
Yep.
So here's the flow of lessons, and I took it off full screen, but you can see it when you come. But I am introducing this tool called Start Soul, and I'm not sure if you have used this before, but it's a really cool tool that you can use, integrating technology, but also incorporating conversation with students along the way. So I just took you right now to the Start Soul webpage, and what you do is, and can you guys see that? Okay, great, thank you. So what you do is you have to create a relationship here, but in the Start Soul page, they've got all of these driving questions. So the focus of this work is teaching from a driving question. So you can see that some of them are like, what happens to two sound waves when they cross each other? How has Black history shaped our nation? What types of conditions contribute to the formation of soil layers? So there's all of these different lesson plans around these driving questions, or you can create your own driving question. So for myself today, and if I was teaching a middle school lesson, mine would have been, how does our body form proteins? Because I was a science teacher for 17 years, and that's where I feel most comfortable. So if I was gonna do that, here's what my flow of my day would look like. I would sign on 5 minutes before the class meets, making sure that all my technology is working, making sure that that my break rooms are created already for my students, and I'm gonna post my question for my kids to explore. And then I'm gonna welcome my students to class, right? With their conversation starter. Again, I'm really thinking and focusing less about content and more about my students right now and how they are relating to themselves, to one another, and to myself. So my conversation starter for my 8th graders would be, if you could pick any animal to have the ability to speak, what animal would it be? And so I would give the students an opportunity to answer those questions and have a little time to banter and talk. The purpose of that is to build community, to create empathy, to engage their hearts and their minds, and really to warm them up to our space and to the learning. And if we go back to what Jim was talking about with thinking, feeling, and doing, that's going to incorporate all of those different types of learning styles. That's going to incorporate thinking and feeling. Then for the introduction period is when I would mute everyone, which you have an opportunity to do. And then I would introduce the soul process and the ground rules, introduce the driving question again of how does our body form proteins. And then I would send the students into breakout rooms that I have pre-assigned for them. The more that you do this work with the students, the more maybe you can let them assign themselves into breakout rooms. But in the beginning, I would really probably go above and beyond in terms of scaffolding things for the students. So this introduction period is, again, to engage their minds. It's to spark inquiry. It's to share important concepts with them. And in terms of thinking, feeling, and doing, we're really focused on the thinking right now. Then I'm going to give them 18 minutes in their breakout rooms to investigate answers to this driving question, other questions that they might have. And depending on how used to this kind of learning your students are, you may need to provide for them some sub-questions. You may want to provide for them a model of the KWHL chart, or anything else that guides their learning to align with the content standards that you are trying to hit in that moment. For me, the purpose of the investigation is, again, to engage the minds. I want them to do some collaboration and critical thinking. I really want them to dive into a sense of inquiry, and I want them to work on their research skills. So for me, that's going to be thinking and doing. And then I'm going to bring them back for the last 10 minutes, and we're going to do a virtual gallery walk. And in that way, we've all done gallery walks in our classrooms. Virtually, it looks a little bit different, but what you can do is create a slide deck like this one that I did here, if it'll load for me. And each group will get a slide, right? So the first slide is going to have your driving question. How does our body form proteins? Underneath is going to be a little descriptor. Each group should gather their thoughts, ideas, and questions on their slide as they investigate the question for the virtual gallery walk. And then I'm going to give them a little scaffolding. You're going to need one recorder to write the notes. You're going to need one presenter for this when you come back to the large group. So each group gets their own slide to write on. And then you're going to bring them back for that review period. Then you're going to go through that. That's going to be engaging minds, building community, allowing them to have some conversation. They're diving into deep thinking. They're using some presentation skills. So they're doing some thinking and doing right there. And then at the end of the class period, the last couple minutes, you're going to mute everybody again. If you choose to. I would mute everybody again for this moment because I want them to do some individual thinking. Have them spend 3 minutes completing an exit ticket, maybe on a Google Doc that you created, answering the driving question, and then ask them for some reflection on the learning process. Did they like it? Was it effective? What would they like to see differently next time? And the part of that is personal reflection, which is going to bring back in the thinking, feeling, and doing for this 45-minute period that I had with them. Okay, I did see that there were some questions in the chat, which I will approach in a minute, but we're moving through our time together. So I'm going to pass you on to Jim for the high school session. I'll make it big for you, Jim.
Thanks, Shana. I appreciate that.
Yep.
Great. Great stuff. And as this is loading up, I mean, one thing that everybody should start recognizing here, there are some universals here. I mean, especially in sort of design that are useful. No matter what age group you're sort of working with here. And one of those big highlights, obviously, is, chunking things into very small pieces of time, which is really, really important. So that's like one of the things I want to highlight here about my sort of lesson plan here is like, you see the time allotments here. I've got 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 20 minutes is actually the longest amount of time that folks are actually engaging in a single activity around that, so keeping things in small chunks of times are just as important for high school students as it is for younger students. And sort of the rule of thumb to kind of go by in a synchronous sort of learning experience, and even an in-person experience as well, is like engagement usually is associated with how old you are. So if you are 5 years old, you have about 5 minutes of attention span and sort of doing what you do. And the older you get, the more attention that you have. And so when we actually really think about that, and we think about create synchronous environment where 20 minutes might be the longest activity that you do, that's actually more time than students normally would be engaged, or they would sort of keep interest sort of peaked in that. They can tolerate us sort of talking about things a long time, but they can't always sort of stay present in sort of that situation there. So a couple of things I want to sort of highlight here is really sort of the second row of sort of my design principles that I use when designing sort of my lessons, especially for a synchronous environment during a time of crisis like now. So, I can't really sort of see the first part there. It's a little bit sort of fuzzy.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. Great. Okay, awesome. The first one, obviously, once again, is like relational. It's that personal sort of connection piece there. But the second thing I want to focus my attention on is like making sure it's age appropriate in the sense of like, these are adolescents that I'm dealing with here, and all the brain science on the age of adolescence, which now is from, designated from ages like 10 to, 25. I mean, they've expanded. So the age of adolescence there a lot. There are things in the teenage brain that I had to be thinking very, very consciously of here. And so like, obviously one of the things is that they're highly socially engaged. And so like, I have to make sure I'm creating opportunities in my lesson here for that social engagement to actually happen. And once again, maximizing the use of those breakout groups. And then also making sure that I'm finding time at the beginning, okay, of sort of the time that we have together here. This is a 45-minute sort of synchronous experience we're together. Like, I want to make sure I'm giving a warm, personal welcome. I might actually ask students to actually do the welcome to the rest of the group here. We want to make sure we're giving them time to connect with friends. And so you'll see down here too, in sort of the design, like I'm really thinking intentionally, how do I want students to be feeling in the first 3 minutes of class? I want them to feel like they're meeting up with an old friend or a group of friends. Like, that is the emotional design that I'm sort of trying to create there. And so then we follow sort of our normal routines, a sort of a check-in, or once again, some sort of soak or sort of activator just like both Shayna and Nathan sort of talked about there. This is a project-based learning class that I sort of designed this for here. So after we sort of do our check-in and we do something to kind of engage us and ground us in the moment that we're here together, because they might have just left another online experience. Now they're coming to my online synchronous meeting. I want to make sure that they're feeling present. I got to make sure they also know, like, what's our agenda? Like, what are we going to be doing when our time together here? And so this is an opportunity for students to set the goal, not only just for the work time they have in the class period, but also the goal they might actually have for the entire week through this process. And so you'll notice, like, once again, 20 minutes is the biggest chunk of time in a 45-minute class that I actually have students doing sort of one thing. Like, that's the biggest sort of chunk there. And once again, I'm trying to find as many opportunities for students to actually lead these things. And so back to Nathan's earlier point here is, like, at the first few times or the first week that we're doing synchronous learning, like, we're not really thinking about content at all. We're thinking about, like, how are we going to work together? How are we going to learn together? And that's going to mean students managing different tasks. It's going to mean, students, sort of connecting and sort of being empowered to sort of lead some of the learning that's actually sort of happening here. Right. So I know we're getting pretty short on time here, but the things I sort of definitely want to highlight here are short chunks of time, giving students sort of voice there, and kind of, once again, intentionally putting, like, your design principles, like these design principles that I have there, explicitly into the planning that you're doing with your students, with, once again, human relations being sort of the first top thing. Mm-hmm. And these will be available, for people to sort of look at later. So don't feel like, oh my gosh, what was that all about? We'll make sure we give you guys a link so you can take a look at those.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, let's see. Now I want to, this is where I have struggles to bring you back after the stop share. Okay, so we have for you a number of resources that were on the bottom of that agenda that we sent out. And in those resources we're gonna send out these slides, obviously. We are going to be available to answer any questions that you might have about those. There are resources that Jim, Nathan, and myself think are really important in terms of working with students in this kind of environment. I wanted to just touch on a couple of those really quickly before you go. I'm trying to be respectful of your time as well. But also know that you can get in touch with us anytime to answer any questions that you might have about these, the sessions that you're seeing, or any questions that you have moving forward. So I am struggling with this share. I'm sorry about that, y'all. It just won't stop sharing. And we did talk about with World Leadership School, we do a lot of this work with teachers all over the place. If you are interested in helping your teachers move into this online space and you want to have a coaching relationship for your teachers, at the bottom of this slide deck is a place where you can register so that we can have a conversation about what kind of support your teachers are needing right now and the best way that we can help you support them as they're moving into this space. So please reach out to us and let us know how we can support you with that. At this moment, I think we are going to try to move into a question and answer session. Jim, did you have a separate Zoom for high school age teachers?
I do, and I'll put it right here in the link.
Okay. If you want to hang around for the question and answer session, then Nathan and I will be in this room for lower school, middle school. Jim has another Zoom link for upper school. And you're welcome to go to any of those. Again, this is optional. If you have to go and you are moving on, please reach out to us if we can help you. It was great to connect with you today and see so many of you. We can tell by how many people have registered for this that this is a real need right now for teachers, big time, as you are entering this space of unknown. And we're just really happy to be here to support you in any way that we can. So with that, if you're going to go with Jim to the high school question and answer session, it is in the Zoom or in the chat link right now from Jim Stevens to everybody. If you want to stay here for question and answer, please do so for lower school and middle school. That's it. If you have questions, why don't you maybe put them in the chat, depending on how many people hang around, or we can just open for normal conversation, which would be great too. Great. Looks like people are transitioning. All right. If you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and fire away.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
We met when you were in Doha. I just wanted to.
Yes, I
say
saw
hi.
you on the register list. Nice to see you.
Yeah, I was so
Yes.
excited. Thank you for sharing this again. It's really nice to reconnect. So
Yeah, absolutely. Great to see you.
yeah. I was thinking about I'm sorry, I'm working on the names in my notes here.
Jim, Nathan?
Jim?
Yep.
Jim?
Yep.
No, Nathan. Sorry,
Yes.
Nathan, what you shared. So our teachers have been teaching synchronously now for 2 weeks and 1 day.
Okay.
And honestly, like we gave them 2 days of basically tech training and some organizational tools and strategies that we're going to be implementing. But I honestly didn't think about structuring how to structure an online lesson for them. They all just dove in. And now I'm in a lot of the sessions, I'm watching a lot of the recordings, and we're now sharing out kind of the best one. Like not that any of them are terrible, because everyone's just trying and learning. But what I've noticed, and when I was thinking about your lesson plan outline, was that seems like that would take, 40, 45 minutes to do all of that. And then an assignment, and then it just seems like,
and that
whoa.
assignment could be optional, and it depends on the age group too. And what I really am preferring a more hybrid model where kids are not having to sit and do everything in front of the computer all day long, but to create some more analog experiences for them. And to really be mindful of like if you're calling the kids to the computer screen for a live class, make sure that it's for really super high impactful content that can't be done in any other context. I think that's really, really important to do. But to create, we've been screaming about screen time for all these years, and now we're breaking that mantra of gluing kids to screens for inordinate hours. So I think if you could create some sort of a hybrid model where they are doing some more analog things. Again, there's the issue of what supplies do they have? Is it an equity issue? Do they have these things? I mean, I found myself, I've been teaching for 22 years. I used to play school when I was a kid. I don't have anything to teach with here at home except for my computer. I do have an easel, but I'm a horrible drawer. So, you have to work with what you've got. Now in my school, we have been doing, so we're still we decided to do asynchronous for the first couple of weeks with the primary school, and then go to synchronous after that. So we're still in our asynchronous phase right now. But I've been teaching live classes, actually teaching English to Chinese kids for over a year now. And I love that format, and those are quicker lessons. They're like 20-minute type lessons, which are more appropriate for the younger ones.
Thank you. Anybody else? I think we can go probably to 105, and then we'll have to shut it down. Any other questions? I want to give a little shout out to Meg Kell in here. Hi, Meg. She's an old student of mine when she was in high school, and now she's in teacher training, and I'm so proud of her. Ooh. I know. It's amazing.
So I have a question regarding our advisory program. Hi, it's so good to see you. So our middle school and upper school will be having advisory sort of separate from their courses. And I think that the teachers are thinking of that as the check-in. Are you thinking, I feel that I would love to have, as a parent of 2 students, that I would love their teachers to still check in and do all of that initial welcome and introduction, and that, given that we're like so constrained for time because they're having, an hour of this class, an hour of that class, what do you have thoughts on sort of the advisory being separate from?
Yeah. I definitely think that we have to rethink this idea of time constraints and recognize that right now the most important thing that we have with our students is our relationship to them, and that the content that we throw at them right now is, and I say this as gently as possible, maybe not going to stick. Right. So we don't know enough about online learning for students to know what really is going to be effective, what's really going to help it stick in the long term and what's not. So I just can't say enough that the most important thing that you can do right now is nurture your relationships with your students and let them know that they are still part of this community, that they are still loved by you, and that they still very much have a dear place in your classroom community. Because our school community is one thing, our classroom communities and cultures are very different, and those are the things that we as teachers nurture specifically with that group of children. So advisory is great. I think it's very important, but I also think your community and your culture that you cultivated this whole year is amazing, right? Like my husband is a teacher and he met his kids for the first time yesterday, and they said it was the highlight of their day to just be together with their friends. So just noticing that what they need right now from us is security first, academics and content is a far second.
And Susan, I put on our list of resources a lot of social emotional learning things that can be accessed for free, that have wonderful conversation starters and topics and guides for walking our youngest students through, you know, whatever things happen to be their way. I put in the chat box, maybe those other teachers could have like a hybrid type model for getting that sort of feedback from their students, make it optional even. A tool that I like to use in world language classes is Flipgrid, where the students record a brief little message that can go to the teacher. You could make it public for the other, and public, I mean the class public, or it could just be locked down where it's just like a communication between the teacher and the student. And it can be two-way too, that you can leave messages for each other.
Thank you for that.
Marco Polo is another really great tool. If your students are old enough to have a phone, it's a great way to have daily check-ins with the kids. It would need some modeling for sure in terms of like what's appropriate to say and what's not appropriate to say, but they can get there. Kids are smart. How about one more question?
Hey, Shana, I don't really have a question. I was just going to offer a couple of things, just because we've been at Collegiate, we've, you know, gone a few days, and it's awesome how everybody's kind of adapting and modifying so quickly. And one of the things that one of the other teachers in the middle school at Collegiate decided to do for their students is when you sign on for the class, say for the first couple of minutes, just sign on, but mute your video and your voice, and just post a little message that just says, hey, class will start in a couple minutes, don't leave the room. And the kids just like, that's their few minutes of time to just connect with each other before class starts. And you know, the very first day, my first boys class was just, as soon as they logged on, they're all chatting and everything, and like I had to shut it down. And so I tried that the next day, and it was amazing how much better the students were just having that little bit of time to just connect with each other and not be in the classroom setting to be able to do that. And I just wanted to share that.
I think that's a really good point, Eli. And we also, I was working with another one of our teachers who in the same vein said that her chat box was just open. And before she even arrived to class, there was like 100 chats in there. So these are those things that we as teachers have to learn how to do, how to like shut down the chat box, or not allow everybody to post in it, not allow kids to sign on before you sign on and allow them to come into the classroom, because those kinds of things, like, she just couldn't get them to come back. She couldn't get them to get out of the chat box. Now she knows how to do that, but those are the things that we need to learn how to do before we dive into this learning with students. Okay, so we are officially out of time.
Hold on, Sonia, it was so good she raised her hand. So we
need wonderful, look at you.
Hi, sorry, I have two questions, and if you guys need to cycle off, that's fine. We can try and do this on email or something.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
One question I have is, how are you guys, those of you who are already in this, how are you supporting teachers? How are you recreating or creating a faculty lounge type feel?
I've got a good answer for that. Our school set up a, one thing that we did is we set up a private Facebook group that faculty and staff could join. And you don't have to be friends with the people on Facebook to be in this group, but it has been such a cool experience where I'm getting to meet people that I work with that I don't really know. And I work really far from where I live, and somebody I work with lives one town over from me. And I never would have known that had this group not existed. But people will post like, you know, silly little prompts like, you know, games that we sort of do where you have to like answer a question, and it's been really fun. And I appreciate the community that has been generated by this. I've seen some people do Zoom happy hours. I participated in one, not with teachers from my school, but some other world language teachers, and they prepared games for us to do while we had this happy hour. And you could call it a coffee break if you want to sanitize it a little bit and make it a little more respectable sounding.
I was going to say, it doesn't have to be drinking, but I've seen more and more schools that are doing that as well, in terms of having like a standing hour-long session where faculty can check in with each other.
And I've seen somebody suggested that people who have been displaced by their jobs, like say your receptionists, to give them a new task of checking in on people, and that they give phone calls or emails or texts or whatever, just to do like little wellness checks on people. And I thought, what a great thing to do to give that person purpose, you know, and not to feel guilty about taking a paycheck because that she's still doing some work, but and that there's such a great, you know, benefit from it.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question is, how are you guys running your division meetings, dean level meetings, your student support team meetings, things of that nature?
We're doing them at my school via Google Hangouts or Google Meet. That's our preferred method at school. I like Zoom better, but we've been doing them in the same way. And in a way that helps us become more proficient at the tool that we'll be using in class with our students when we transition over to synchronous classes.
But I think, Sonia, in the same way, when you do have these virtual sessions with faculty, again, I think, you know, focusing on the social emotional learning in the space that your faculty are in, and really, really nurturing that sense of community through those conversation starters, using coaching sentence stems. I put some links in the resources for all of that stuff, but really being intentional about the feeling part of what's happening in your faculty group right now. I mean, if we have, you know, on any given day, I think the statistic is somewhere between 30 and 45% of your faculty are struggling with something that you don't know about on a personal level. Now you can even just imagine how much more that is with furloughs and people being laying off and financial insecurity and all kinds of things. So just taking time to recognize that they are people first and teachers second in this moment, I think is really, really important. And then also celebrating that.
And the stress of being cooped up in the house with your family for this long.
I know.
But I'll also tell you another thing that my school has done that I really like is that our communications office got us all to do these welcome or hello videos from our houses, and did a montage and sent them out to the community. And it was just really a nice, heartfelt, warming sort of thing to see this, you know, nice message from the school. And all the teachers in the primary school are doing video messages to their students on a daily basis. Not long by any means, but just, you know, just so they can see the teacher's face and her warmth and her personality, and, you know, with a nice, reassuring voice to, you know, comfort them through this exceptional time.
How do they share those videos?
So we have been sharing, so our first glitch was that we were embedding them in Google Slides presentations. which work well for people using computers, but our littlest ones are using iPads. And the iPads did not go home with the Google Slides app loaded onto it. So it's not playing well on that. So we are going to have to reconfigure how we do that. But we have a course management system that puts out alerts to families via email. So that's probably how we're going to transition over to this. And then the ones that came from the school were in our weekly newsletter that we email out. It was on our YouTube channel and on our social media.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much. Let us know at World Leadership School if we can help you as you transition so we can support your faculty. Blake, thank you so much for the opportunity of this partnership today. I think it was really great.
Thank you all for being here.